What it do, baby? It's the YouTube version of the Preachers and Sneakers podcast with your esteemed host, Benjamin G. Kirby. Hope everybody's having a good week whenever you're watching this, either when it drops or in the future, whenever. Thanks for tuning in to the most important podcast on the internet. All 14 people that listen to it, you're about to be super enlightened. Interesting episode. We've got our first pilot episode released on YouTube currently. I want to check that out at this link here or this link here. I have an editor now, so hopefully that won't make me look like a fool and we can actually put a link there. I've got a very exciting, people in Christian culture always say exciting. I'm going to not use that. I have a super interesting interview later on in the podcast with my new friend, Kirsten Powers. And you may know her from CNN fame. She's also a New York Times bestselling author. She is a political analyst. This woman is impressive. To say I was intimidated is a severe understatement. This woman is incredibly smart, not scared to voice her opinion, but also she just wrote a book on grace, which is the majority of what we talked about. And I think you'll get something out of it. I think it'll be at least entertaining for you, also educational or maybe eye-opening for a new perspective on how to display grace. We kind of challenge the notion of the typical view of showing grace to one another. And Kirsten has basically written an entire book on how it's not about blindly letting everything go, but it's more complicated than that. You know, this is why I didn't write a book on grace, because I can't really vocalize what she vocalized. If you watch to the end, we have a very, very good interview. Not because of me, but because of her. But before we get into that, I'm going to go through some of my favorite categories for the week. This is, depending on the editing schedule and when this gets posted, this might be outdated, but this is what's going on currently in the faith world. And I don't know how to validate this, but going to school at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, there was a famed pastor named Ronnie Floyd that led, I think it's called the Church at Pinnacle Hills, and it turned to Cross Church. I think his son runs it now. But Ronnie Floyd, and I'm not going to spend any time validating this, apparently flew a helicopter between his different campuses on Sundays to preach in person at his different Sundays. Anyways, he was the president and CEO of the Southern Baptist Convention's executive committee, and according to a bunch of different news sources, he's now resigned from that position because, well, his quote, it says, "Due to my personal integrity and the leadership responsibility entrusted to me, I will not and cannot any longer fulfill the duties placed upon me as the leader of the executive, fiscal, and fiduciary entity of the SBC." This is like so intense. Like church denominations, it seems like it's overly intense. I imagine there's purpose behind it, but it just seems like an overly complicated organization for a group of people that are just trying to do church all in the same way. You know, that's a very like uninformed view of it, but it's like, do you really, like, I don't know, a lot of this seems super intense because they're kind of under some heat right now because of their response to apparently mistreating sexual abuse survivors. The executive committee is pretty divided right now, and they voted on October 5th to waive their attorney-client privilege for a investigative probe, agreeing to turn over legally protected records to investigators. So we'll see what comes from that. But I think Ronnie Floyd, who was the president and CEO, was very much against waiving attorney-client privilege. I think probably because it would open themselves up to a lot of new lawsuits, but it's not looking good over there. And this is the problem, and I've talked about this a ton, but this is the problem with having a organization, a faith organization that is in, look at my hair. Oh my gosh, look at my freaking hair. This is such an amateur operation. Anyways, with having an organization that is so large and so popular that anytime you have any kind of like internal issues, it makes all the headlines and it kind of detracts from the whole point of the organization to begin with, which is disappointing. But that's going on, and we will see what happens there. The SBC is the news gift that keeps on giving, I guess. I stole this from Relevant because they reported on it. Several other people reported on it. But apparently 17 Christian missionaries have been kidnapped in Haiti. Men, women, and children who were serving as missionaries in Haiti have been kidnapped by a local gang, according to Christian Aid Ministries, abducted while visiting an orphanage outside of Port-au-Prince on Saturday. Dude, I haven't seen what the U.S. government response to this is, but I hope we rescue these freaking American missionaries in Haiti. Haiti is not it's not the resort capital of the world, I think. And these people are legitimately have gone into harm's way in order to share the gospel. And it sounds like it's become become more and more dangerous. Let's see. Joel Trimble, who's a missionary that's worked in Haiti since the 70s, said the 17 missionaries were kidnapped in an area that was known to be unsafe, and that traveling there as a large group was very unwise. Kidnapping is quick money, and when they see a van full of white people, that is major dollar signs. So the State Department's issued a level 4 travel advisory. I hope we rescue these people. I mean, this is like risking safety in order to share your faith. Kind of puts things in perspective maybe for us here in the United States. I hope that gets resolved quickly. I hope those missionaries are brought home safe. Moving on. Sneakers. A couple of nice new releases coming here in the coming weeks. It looks like there is, Travis Scott is the money printer for Nike and Jordan brand right now. There was a new release on Sneaker News that said Travis Scott Air Jordan 1 Low Reverse releasing in 2022. Why wouldn't you just slap a new colorway on the reverse swoosh of the Travis Scott Air Jordan 1 Lows? Let's see. Usual earth tones, only partially rearranged for a more unique look. Brown, once applied in the overlays, now dresses the base. Sail, in contrast to the aforementioned 2, mimics its inspiration. What is this? What is this description? There's still just a rumored release. It's not a specific date, but there was a picture of Travis Scott actually wearing them. Those look pretty sick. I mean, they're going to be impossible to get. Every Travis Scott sneaker release is impossible to get, but it's fine. And also, this one, actually, my buddy Caesar over at Sneaker Bar Detroit had a long rant about the off-white Air Jordan 2s and how basically lazy Virgil was in designing these. Another guy that can just like slap his brand on something and just turn it into money is Virgil Abloh at Off-White. Air Jordan 2, like, I can't claim to be a purist OG sneakerhead. This sneaker is not for me. Like, I can't pull it off. I would never wear it. I don't think it's that great looking. The purists that love all the Jordan OGs probably like it, but man, this is not a good looking shoe. Jordan 2 to begin with is just kind of like a mediocre silhouette to me. And then now Virgil has tried his best to, he made the like cracked midsole there. You'll just have to see it. I'll try to put a picture up here once again for the editor. Looks like the release is coming November 12th at select retailers at Nike.com. Retail is going to be $250 and resale is going to be $11 billion, as is every Off-White other than the track spike Off-Whites that are basically pointless for anyone except that runs on a rubber track. Have y'all seen those? Those Off-Whites that went straight to, seems like they were going straight to the outlet. So 2 pretty interesting releases. Look out for those. The reverse Travis Scott Air Jordan 1 Lows and then the abysmal Off-White Air Jordan 2s. This is kind of old news now, but John Gruden got fired, who's the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. Infamous guy. He's got a very interesting personality. He's been known to be a hothead and such, but he had a bunch of emails, I guess, get released as part of some other kind of investigation, I think for the Washington football team. But it came out that he had sent all these racist and every other type of foul email back and forth between owners or something. This is the most butchered retelling of a news story. But basically, John Gruden either got fired or he got voluntarily, like he got encouraged to resign because it happened in one night. It was during Monday Night Football last week, I think. They like cut halfway through Monday Night Football and said John Gruden's resigned, and it was just this huge story. And John Gruden's like on a $100 million coaching deal, and I imagine he has some type of morality clause that gets the Raiders out of that, but I'm not completely sure. So that's developing, and was super interesting. I hate to talk about this, but Arkansas got beat once again this past weekend, facing an unranked Auburn on the heels of facing Ole Miss, both teams that we could totally have beaten, but we gave the game away. If you know anything about Arkansas football, last year we had this terrible officiating crew at the Auburn-Arkansas game in 2020. First voice crack of the vlog or the podcast. Again, we should have won against Auburn based on a miscalled fumble. And in the first quarter of this year's Arkansas-Auburn game, we had a fumble that was called in favor of Auburn that we would have turned over in our favor in very good field position. And we ended up losing that game. Of course, Arkansas-Auburn once again is decided by poor officiating. And I know everybody's not sick of being beat over the head with vaccination info, but Kyrie Irving is actually refusing to get vaccinated. It sounds like the NBA was mandating vaccinations, and it's already cost him his role on the NBA's best team and his pending $186 million contract, according to Yahoo News, everyone's most dependable news source. So Kyrie can't play with the Nets full time because he's unvaccinated, so they're sitting him, and apparently the Nets are no longer intending to offer him a 4-year, $186 million extension. This dude's pretty marketable in terms of the NBA and footwear. He's got his own shoe line and everything. Dude, can you imagine $186 million over 4 years, bro? I cannot even fathom it. The Nets also don't intend to pay Irving for his missed home games, which comes to a total of $16 million if he misses all 41. That's next level rich when you're just like, I'm just going to table. You know what? Don't pay me the $16 million. So more, I guess that's developing as well. But Kyrie, as of now, standing strong and not getting vaccinated to play in the freaking NBA, bro. Chalk me full with 5G and a tracking chip for $186 million over 4 years. There's a lot of principles I think that I would compromise for $186 million. Let's be honest. God dang it, dude. Oh, man. In the entertainment world for us, I mean, there's so much content out there to be consumed across the board. It just comes out every second of every day. But my wife and I just watched the show Midnight Mass on Netflix, bro. Can I just say, this show is freaking terrifying. It's not like Saw or it's not like brutal horror, but this show is freaking insane and terrifying, but also we couldn't stop watching it. It's about this tiny island town with this priest that shows up. Just insanity ensues. It's got the guy from Friday Night Lights, Matt Saracen from Friday Night Lights. Shout out to Friday Night Lights, though. That show was awesome. And he's one of the main guys, and I don't want to give any spoilers, but do not watch this with kids. This will haunt them for years. I'm still kind of haunted by it, but it's also pretty entertaining. I mean, it's got like a demonic element to it, so some people don't like messing with that. I don't usually like messing with that, but this show was pretty entertaining. That's all I'll say. Succession is finally back on HBO. My wife and I watched the first episode back, and I think they're now categorizing the show as a dramedy. And man, the writing and the acting in this show is so freaking good. Yes, of course, there's some language, but the show is awesome. I would check that out if you don't. I mean, if you got HBO Max, for sure, check it out and maybe run it back through seasons 1 and 2 first, because the story is really, really good. Nerd alert. This is my one video game piece. Halo Infinite is coming. So for all my millennial brethren that grew up playing Halo 1 and 2, LAN partying it up, not talking to girls, standing in line at midnight to get the newest release, Halo Infinite's coming finally, and it's actually going to have a free-to-play multiplayer, which is super dope. This is how much money there is in video games now. They can basically make AAA video game and literally give it out for free, and they're making more money than they ever have previously of all the like in-game purchases, and they just have all these different monetization efforts that they can basically give away the multiplayer for free. So that comes out. It's been delayed a couple times. There was a beta that came out December 8th, just in time for Christmas. Dude, there's a bunch of video games coming out for the holiday season. Halo Infinite, Battlefield 2042, Call of Duty Vanguard. As if I have any time to play these at all, having a child and a wife and a freaking job. But you know, here's to hoping. It's one of those things that I'm probably going to ask for Christmas and play twice. But be on the lookout for Halo Infinite, and if you get it, let me know. Send me your gamer tag, and maybe we can hop in the Halo Infinite streets. So that's it for my rundown of things that I'm interested in the past couple weeks for the Preachers and Sneakers podcast. We're doing this live with very little outline, which is the only way I can do things. Because if I write an outline or a script or whatever, it's going to come off super robotic, disingenuous. It might still be coming off as disingenuous. It's fine. Hope everybody's having a good week and is enjoying the new content. There's some new stuff coming, some really huge stuff coming actually in the long form entertainment space that I can't talk about in any detail. There's some big things coming, so stay tuned for that. Make sure you subscribe to the Preachers and Sneakers YouTube channel. Okay, enough yapping. Let's get into my conversation with Kirsten Powers, who, like I said earlier, is an author, columnist, political analyst. She writes for USA Today. She's constantly on CNN. She's like on all the CNN shows. Anderson Cooper, Don Lemon, Jake Tapper. She's written for the Washington Post. She has worked at Fox News. She's done it all in terms of political commentary and journalism. She's just written a new book on grace, and I got the opportunity to sit down virtually and talk with her about it. So check it out. Kirsten Powers, thanks for being with me today on the super niche, super important Preachers and Sneakers podcast. How's it going today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. And also extra points for saying my name right.
Yes.
That does not happen very often.
I started to really actually have anxiety about it. I was running before this, and I purposely rewound your podcast and how does she say her name? I'm glad I passed the test.
You're a pro. That's really, yeah.
I've been at this for a while, and it's netted me like $50. So I'll take that for what it's worth. So where are you in the world currently?
I am in Washington, D.C. in my home.
Okay. Very kind of low cost of living place. Really.
Yeah. Real easy place to live. Yeah.
And you and I got connected by way of Jonathan Merritt, who is my literary agent and also a pain in my ass a lot of days because he is the type to be unrelenting when it comes to like reaching our mutual goals and everything. How do you know Jonathan? Because I'm really grateful that he connected us, because I would have never dreamed of having somebody like you on this podcast, but I'm really glad that he connected us.
Yeah. I mean, I've known Jonathan, I can't even, honestly don't even remember when I didn't know him. We met, we always do this and we can never really figure it out. I think we have differing memories about it, but I think that we met at a conference. I think we met at a Q conference actually.
Okay.
And it was one of those instantaneous, just hit it off things. And yeah, and we just became like besties, and he's just such a blessing in my life. And I'm so grateful for him. Like I can't even imagine what life would be like without him.
Yeah. He's got a very like wide, I guess the term would be breadth of or width of friendships across the spectrum of people. Like he likes to refer to himself as like an equal opportunity offender. I don't know if he coined that term, but he is good at that for sure. But anyways, I really love him. He's the reason I have a book. He's the reason I'm still probably able to do things like this. And so I'm very grateful that he's a kind of a networker type as well. And so really, yeah, absolutely. So, you're in Washington, D.C., and for people that don't know you, I'd love it if maybe you gave me the elevator pitch about who's Kirsten, what do you got going on in the world today. Obviously, we're going to talk about your book, which I'm basically through, we'd just love to learn more.
Well, I'm from Alaska. I'm from Fairbanks, Alaska, and I grew up there to a couple of archaeologists who were at the university there. So that's the most interesting thing about me. And now I live in Washington, D.C., and I've spent my adult life either in Washington, D.C. or New York City. And so I currently am a senior political analyst at CNN and a columnist for USA Today, and I'm an author, and I have a book out on grace that everybody needs to buy if they want to survive Thanksgiving.
That's right.
And and that's kind of what's going on with me. I'm a dog mom, and
of two dogs, right?
Two dogs, and they're the center of my life. I have a fiance, Robert, who is also a journalist
and a Texan, right?
He's a Texan. He's from Houston, and writes for the New York Times Magazine and National Geographic, and is currently in Kosovo working on a story.
Oh, wow.
So,
I've actually been there.
Yeah. So, oh yeah. Wow.
When I was in the Marines, maybe for a different reason.
And so I think those are the most important things probably to know about me.
That's really cool. And, you have written a book previously, which is a New York Times bestseller, which is a very hard thing to do and is a testament, I think, to the book and also, the contributions you make into the political landscape. You're the type of person, I'm learning, that you are not scared to get into the thick of an argument and stand your ground. But that's a big portion of kind of the book, from what I'm gathering, is that you have done that for a majority of your career, but you're also now maybe reevaluating some of that, or getting people to wrestle with maybe how to do that in a way that doesn't ruin relationships for all of eternity. And the book is called Saving Grace: Speak Your Truth, Stay Centered, and Learn to Coexist with People Who Drive You Nuts. And I think, you're a professional journalist and a political analyst on CNN all the time in HD, and I'm just an Instagram guy. But I think you and I have a lot of commonalities because we're both trying to kind of poke at the thing of which we work every day in. Like, I kind of comment on church culture, of which I'm very much involved, and celebrity culture and social media addictions, that kind of thing. And you have this career in politics and writing and everything, but you're also kind of being introspective through the book and maybe reevaluating some of the ways or the methods by which you had relationships in the past. Can you talk about maybe how you came to that realization that you might have to reevaluate the grace in your life or the grace that you're showing others?
Yeah, I think necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. And for me, it really became untenable to continue the same way I was going. I was so miserable. Just to your point of what you were saying before about, yes, there is the problem of how it affects your relationships when you're arguing with people all the time, but there's also the problem of how it affects you.
Yes.
And it was affecting me, not the arguing as much as the being angry and rage filled and filled with contempt and all these other things all the time. And it just had a wear and tear on my psyche, on my body. I was sick. I had chronic fatigue. I had fibromyalgia. I had depression. I had anxiety. I had all the things, right? And I had to start looking at why I was feeling the way I was feeling, and also why I was having such a hard time aligning my spiritual beliefs with my behavior. Because if you were to ask me what I believed, I would have said I believe in loving your enemies and, loving your neighbor and all these things. And I could not in any way say that that's what I was doing. It just wasn't. Now, maybe my outward behavior looked like that, but the soundtrack in my head was not like that at all. And so I kind of hit a wall, and I just realized something's got to change, and I've got to course correct. And I wrote a column for USA Today where I write, and I basically said our culture is very toxic, and I'm really evaluating how I've contributed to that. Even though a lot of people, and even when I wrote it, said to me, this is kind of crazy that you wrote this because you're the voice of reason and you're so reasonable. And I was like, yeah, I am. And sometimes I'm toxic. So you can most of the time be one way and then also do these other things. And so I think that I was spending way too much time on Twitter and social media, and I was just pissed off all the time. And look, I think anger is a great thing. I'm not anti-anger. Anger lets you know something is wrong. But this was a little out of control. And like I said, it was more like rage. And so I think I just realized that something had to change. And so that really was the first step. And I really don't like to argue with people anymore. I like to talk to people, and I like to have constructive conversations with people, but I don't argue. That's just not, I'm just a no to that. I'm not interested.
Yeah.
And certainly, I guess sometimes maybe if I'm on air, it might happen, and that's part of my job, and you're going back and forth. But I mean, that's how long does that really last? 10 minutes or something. But in my actual life, I don't argue with people anymore. And whereas when I was younger, I loved to argue. I don't know if you do the Enneagram on this show or not, but I'm an Enneagram 8.
Okay.
So I love to throw down and get into it. And I just don't like that anymore.
Yeah.
I want to have conversations and learn things and be curious and talk to people who are curious, and happy to hear things I don't agree with, but I'm just not interested in the kind of talking past each other stuff that we have going on in our culture.
Because it starts to, you've already mentioned it. It starts to manifest a real physical response. And at a certain point, I go through this too, where it's like, how am I letting this app control the fact that I literally am enraged because of some rando that said something over DM or on a comment or whatever.
About it. You're laying in bed at night.
How am I going to destroy this person? How am I going to leverage this platform to destroy this person that I don't know? And it's, I married way up, and I have a wife that's very wise and has kept me from really getting myself in trouble, because it sometimes it helps to have an objective person on the outside to say, hey dude, or, hey, you this has way too much power over you. And this is going to net you nothing, even if you do have the perfect own.
Literally be standing over me, and he'd be like, just walk away. Just shut the computer.
But it feels like relinquishing.
I can't.
Yeah. It's like they've won, right? But in fact, you're actually losing by continuing to. What I've ended up doing is I get thousands of messages all the time from pissed off Christians or pissed off people that think I'm a hypocrite or whatever. And there's a few key words at the start of most of their messages that I can just see in the preview. And a lot of times I'll just delete it because I know if I open that message, it's going to occupy 4 hours at least of my time where I'm thinking about, like, am I really in the wrong? What have I done wrong? But also, like, screw this person, you know? And so it's interesting because you write a lot about this, and we can bounce around because I'm most of the way through your book. You know, you talk about, this isn't really a self-help book in that it's just like 10 steps on how to have more grace, but it's
practical.
Practical. It's things that have worked for you, and it's also a pretty honest analysis of maybe where you've gone wrong in the past or how you've coped with certain things. Like you talk in the book about a foam bat that somebody recommended that you get, and you just freaking schwack that thing when people are mad or screaming into a pillow, that kind of thing. There's plenty of books that come out every single day that are pretty vanilla, nothing, at least in the Christian space, obnoxious, nothingness, self-help books. I always appreciate somebody, regardless if I agree with them or not, that is willing to audit their own life and try to publicly wrestle with a thing. Because, and you talk about, duality of thinking, all that kind of stuff. Could you talk a little bit about that and maybe, I don't know, go a little bit deeper on that idea?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, I don't think we do have enough of that in our culture. And I actually think it's discouraged that we look at ourselves, especially people in the public eye. There isn't really a culture where people are holding themselves accountable or looking back. And I certainly never really did it before I wrote this book. So it's a very unpleasant process also. So I can understand why people don't want to do it. It was pretty shame inducing and horrifying. Yeah. And you're just like, oh, and lucky for me, it's all on the internet.
Right.
Like most people get to like go back and it happened like in their relationships or something and they can apologize. It's like, no, it's just there for everybody to see.
Yeah.
And so for me, learning about dualism and this binary way of thinking was my first turning point. I think that's actually what opened up the space for me even to have the thought of, I think we need more grace in this culture, and I think I probably need to have more grace. I don't know that I ever could have even gotten there without that. And the person who introduced that to me, or at least in a way where I could hear it, was Richard Rohr. Mm-hmm. And so I discovered him. I started reading all his books. I was kind of hanging on by a thread with Christianity. And so it was actually Jonathan who said, I think you need to read Richard Rohr. Because I was kind of at that point where I was like, if this is Christianity, like it's not for me. And I don't know what I am. And so I started reading his books and I thought, this is what I believe. And I can relate to this. But one of the main things, as anybody knows who follows him, that he talks about is that we have to let go of this black and white, all right or all wrong thinking. And I became aware, and then I actually, because of him, got into the Enneagram, and I'm an 8. And so I started to look at it and go, wow, I live in a culture that's very binary. And then my trauma response was to become even more binary. Uh-huh. And so of course I'm seeing monsters everywhere, right? And that makes it very hard. If my psychological reaction to keep me safe is to make things even more starkly black and white, then how am I going to ever have grace for anybody? And so that started me sort of down the road of, well, maybe there's more than 2 ways to see something. Maybe there are multiple ways to see it. Maybe it's possible that I don't have to answer every single question about Christianity and still be a Christian. Maybe I can embrace mystery. Mm-hmm. What a radical idea.
Nuance.
It was a radical idea. Now I had to work hard on my trauma and all these other things. And I had to unlearn a lot of things to get to a place where I could start seeing the world that way. But I at least I recognized that something was wrong. Yeah. And so I think it set me up to, when I did hit that wall, to say, this is unsustainable. Yeah. I can't live like this. And everyone around me can't live like this. Everyone I knew was saying, I'm so miserable. I'm so unhappy. I'm so hopeless. I'm so just at the end of my rope. And so I basically became a project of how do you fix this problem? And that's where I came up with grace.
Yeah. I think I know I've spent a lot of money and time in therapy talking about that very thing, about in my mind, there's only two extremes. I'm either a hypocrite or I'm completely in the right in everything, and there's just more options than that. And at least online, as a professional Instagrammer, I guess.
But what would happen if like no one was allowed to say the word hypocrite on Twitter? It would go out of business, right?
Right.
It's not, that's the entire argument all the time, which I always say, like, I don't even care. Like, that's not fine. If you think I'm a hypocrite, it makes no difference to me. Now let's talk about what we need to talk about. I mean, that's the Washington game, this obsession. And you see it in, I guess, in your role too. It's just always like obsessing about other people's hypocrisy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
What, it's just weird to me. It's like, what, let's stop talking about that and talk about the issue. And why are people so angry about somebody? And even, I don't know what it's like for you, but for me, when I'm being accused of a hypocrite, they're usually completely misrepresenting what I think or believe and have ever said.
Yep.
Right. And so, which is one of the things I talk about in the book. It's called Rhetorical Framing. And it's something that's incredibly toxic. And if you want to have, if you want to operate with grace, you have to stop doing it. And it's basically recounting somebody's view in a way that they find completely unrecognizable.
Yeah. And that's something that I've really struggled with responding to, because it feels like you're being wronged, where it's like, no, if you would just understand what I actually mean or what my actual heart is behind this, but the amount of effort or time it takes to try to talk that person down, it's like, oh, there, kind of what we were talking about earlier, there goes the 4 hours, where it's like, I think you mentioned in the book that, you kind of frame some things as your, when you talk about boundaries, which is like such an important thing. It's just like so much I want to talk to you about, but kind of when in the topic of boundaries, you talk about your no's and things that you're an automatic no to. And one of those things was, I think you said you're a no to arguing with people that don't want to understand you, or
that are committed to misunderstanding.
Committed to misunderstanding you.
Yeah.
And talk about that for me.
Yeah, well, and honestly, anybody who starts an email with "you're a hypocrite" isn't interested in having a conversation. Have you ever said that to anybody or written that to anybody? Because I have.
No, absolutely not.
Anybody who's doing that is not a person who is really seeking to have a conversation. And so I just don't engage with that. I will engage with somebody who seems like they're actually maybe don't completely understand. They're seeking to understand more or something like that, which is a unicorn on social media. It happens occasionally. Yeah. So I think that boundaries, for me, instead of demonizing people, which was often my reaction when somebody did something that I thought was harmful, was to start demonizing them, at least in my head, is to just say, okay, I'm just a no to that. That is not okay. Now, what am I going to do about it? I'm not going to demonize the person. I'm going to then, I say, figure out what your no is and then figure out what your yes is. So if I'm a no to that, what are some things I can do to counter it that don't involve demonizing that person? It may involve confronting them. It may not, if they're the kind of person that you're describing, right? Where it's just throwing pearls before swine. It's like, they can't receive what you're going to say. They don't want to receive, no matter how nicely you say it, they're not going to hear you. So what can you do if you are seeing that? There's a whole bunch of things you could do, right? You could donate money to somebody. You could volunteer somewhere. You could, if you're a podcast host, you could do an episode on it. I'm a columnist. I could write a column about it. You kind of have to think about what in your life, instead of justifying it by saying, yeah, but I really care about issue X, and so I'm justified in demonizing them because it's, what else am I going to do? It's like, well, there's a whole bunch of things you could do.
Right. Instead of the either or, the either demonize the person or not address it at all.
Yeah. And you also, surprise, surprise, I don't even know why we need social science for this, but I have a bunch in the book. Yelling at people, calling them a hypocrite, all these things doesn't not change anybody's mind. So if you actually want to change somebody's mind, there are a lot of tools that I have in the book about what actually might get someone to hear what you're saying.
Yeah. And
it's not name calling, it's not attacking them, it's not misrepresenting what they believe. And so it is having grace for people, which is essentially saying, I define grace in a lot of different ways in the book to try to help people think about it. But one of the things I say is grace is allowing other people to not be you. And so, because we do often have an expectation that if somebody is doing something that we don't agree with, that we are actually justified in tearing them apart, rather than saying, you know what, you're allowed to be that just because I don't understand it. And I'm going to have grace for you. And by that, I don't mean I'm endorsing what you're saying. And I don't mean I'm excusing what you're saying, but I am going to, if you're a believer, you might say, I see God in you. If you're not, or even if you are, but say you're just somebody who's a secular person, I see the humanity in you. I see that you are more than just this thing you're saying or this belief that you hold.
Right.
And I'm going to interact with you respectfully and honor that. Right. That's how grace can be a tool. It's creating a little distance, a little space between you and that person's beliefs. Whereas like what you were describing earlier, we often are like, we take it all in and we like marinate in it. And we're just, and it's like, what are we doing?
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to go back a bit because kind of the crux of the whole book is maybe a reframing of what grace is, because you and I both have spent time in the quote unquote evangelical circles, and grace means one thing most times, but you get right to it at the beginning of the book about saying what grace is not, and kind of comparing grace to this idea of like unity, that kind of thing. Could you talk a little bit about that without, I don't want you to give away the whole book. I want people to buy the book.
No, I think one of the things I realized as I started to delve into the topic of grace was that I misunderstood grace. And I think a lot of people misunderstand it. And Christians do usually, when they talk about it in terms of it's something we get from God, right? And so I'm talking about how do we offer this to other people? And I use the framework of Christianity, which is it's unmerited favor. So that's what I just described. I see the humanity in you because you have humanity, not because you've done something to deserve that. It's unmerited. That's the point. So it's not that there's all these other things that I like about you, and therefore I'm going to have grace for you. It's just yours. It's free. And so I use that paradigm, but I really tease that out into what does that mean? Does that mean that nobody's ever held accountable? Well, no, that's not right. And I mean, that's not the Christian perspective either, right? Nobody's saying God doesn't hold you accountable just because God gives you grace. So it's the question is, what does accountability look like? And often I think what we call accountability looks a lot more like annihilation.
Yeah.
So it's a whole scale destruction of the person's reputation. We don't like them. They're horrible. They're bad. They're rotten, irredeemable, versus you did a thing that is bad and you should be held accountable for that thing. And to me, grace, that's what grace-filled accountability looks like. Again, it's looking at the person in their totality and saying, I'm going, what is the proportionate way to hold you accountable here? And also I talk about scapegoating a lot in the book, that I think a lot of times when we annihilate people, it's because we're scapegoating them. We're taking the sins of society and we're heaping them on them. And we are understandably upset about problems that exist in culture. And we see somebody that sort of becomes the proxy for that. And then we tear them apart, basically. Yeah. And so it's completely unconscious. Everybody does it. It's as old as humanity. And so to be aware of these kinds of things, so I will check myself when things are happening and ask, like, am I scapegoating somebody? Am I demonizing somebody? Really, how is my brain working against me here? My brain likes binaries. My brain loves to sort things. My brain loves to
feel justified,
bad guys, and all these things. It's like, and so I talk a lot about the brain science there. Why does this other person in my family believe the things that they believe? Well, probably because of confirmation bias, and their brains again are working against them the same way my brain's working against me, and it's always leading me to things that reaffirm what I believe. That makes it easier for me to give somebody grace. If I understand, how they're arriving at the information that they're arriving at and things like that.
Yeah. That's interesting because, you talk about annihilation, which immediately you're basically talking about quote unquote cancel culture. I've written about this, how this is kind of, people see this as a binary too. Like, we've got to get rid of cancel culture, or this person deserves to be canceled every time. And there is I guess I would like to hear about how you find the middle ground there, because I think you and I both would believe that there are things worth screaming at the top of our lungs about on all platforms that we have access to. But there is also plenty of examples in the past where maybe things have been way overblown.
Yeah.
Could you speak on that a little bit about how cancel culture looks to you?
I have 2 chapters on cancel culture in quotes, and I sort of say so-called cancel culture because it's one of these things that it has so many definitions and it means so many different things to different people that it's hard to know what people are even talking about when they say that phrase. Some people will say it's just accountability. There is no such thing as cancel culture, and some people will say it's like, the worst thing that's ever happened in the history of the country. I don't really agree with either of those points, but I do think that to the extent that this exists, it's because, I'm sorry, my dog's drinking water. Should I stop?
It's great.
Okay.
We're doing it live.
To the extent that it exists because we don't deal with the systemic issues in society. And so we drive people to a point where they have tried the nice ways and they have brought it up and they have said all these things. And white people are still saying the N-word, right? And so it's understandable that people would get to a point of just saying, this is enough, right? We don't.
I'm done with feelings. I'm done caring about your feelings.
Is it going to take somebody losing their job and their reputation to finally get people to see that there is someone's going to be held accountable? And so I think that we have to remember, and I think we often see in these situations where there's a so-called cancellation going on, people will come and they want grace for the person who's caused the harm.
I was about to ask about that.
No grace for the people who've been harmed.
Yeah.
And so they complain that the people who've been harmed, they're using the wrong tone and they're not saying it the right way, or they're doing it in the wrong place, or it's never the right way, right? And so I think I'm more inclined to have grace towards the people who are harmed. And I have grace towards the people who are doing the harming, but I also recognize that we have to change if we want this stuff to stop. We have to start taking these issues seriously, or this is going to continue. And I think also consider that when you want to go on Twitter or when you want to go on Facebook and call somebody out, just understand there's a very high likelihood that that person's life is going to end up in tatters. And just make sure that you're okay with that. Make sure you're okay with the possibility that this person's kid who has cancer is going to lose their health insurance, or whatever it is that we don't know that's going on in their life. That's what I'm saying. People will say, well, they lost their job, big deal. It's like, first of all, that's ridiculous. Losing your job is a very big deal. And so, but in this country, it's particularly a big deal because it's where you get your health insurance. So, and your reputation is destroyed forever, basically, right? And so it's very hard to even find. It's not like when people say, oh, they can go find another job. It's like, really?
Have you tried recently?
Well, also, have you tried to do it where people Google your name and the first thing that comes up is this? So now, sometimes, like you said, that's an appropriate punishment. But what we can't do is ever minimize it.
Right.
And that's what I see people doing. I see people just saying, well, it's not that big of a deal that this and that happened to them. And I'm saying it is a big deal. And I think that we can't pretend like that isn't happening. So my position is obviously one it's a very both and position, right? I'm not falling hard on either side, though. Like I said, I do always, and I actually think this is very Christian, I do always identify with the people who are being harmed and the people who are at the quote unquote bottom, right? The preference for
the least of these. Shocking.
Yeah. So I am going to always go in that direction, but I will also, grace is always, I think where it's the hardest to give is exactly where you need to be giving it. And so with the person who's caused the harm, that's going to be the hardest place for me, but that doesn't mean that they don't also deserve grace. And what that's going to look like is me saying, you made a mistake, but I'm sure there are a lot of other things about you that I don't know about, that are good.
Yeah.
And I don't have to make you into this demon.
Right. How is that going for you in practice? Like, do you find that you've got a handle on those things now, or are you still actively slogging through, working through those things?
No, I'm a completely different person than I was when I started the book. And like any of my friends.
Oh, wow.
That. Oh yeah. It's not.
And did you write it last year, or is it been
I wrote it over the
multi-year?
last couple of years.
Okay.
So yeah. And, I'm just, any friend would tell you, I'm just a completely different person. I'm super zen. Like it's very hard to pull me into these things. But a lot of it is because, as I outlined in the book, I have reversed engineered it, right? So I've gone back and said, what gets me to that place where I'm so agitated that I can't give grace? I spend almost no time on social media.
Praise.
And occasionally when I do, I do start to feel myself get a little agitated. I'm not, it doesn't hijack me the way that it used to hijack me, but that's because I dealt with my trauma. So I'm a little clearer. I'm very clear with my boundaries about who gets access to me and what kind of people I'll engage with and all those things. So I use all these tools, and then I don't think you can really offer grace unless you're taking care of yourself and you're getting sleep and you're exercising and you're healthy and all these other things. And so my whole life is kind of built around those things. And then I use all the tools that I have in the book. So if I do start to go down that, I stop and I talk about how we have to develop humility and say, I don't know everything. What am I not seeing? There's probably something here. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. So I start using those things. And so I generally just don't take it. I don't take on other people's stuff.
Yeah, that's so hard.
And to me, that is part of grace. It's just saying, like I said, you're you and I'm me, and I'm having grace for you being you. And even though I don't agree with it. And so I instead try to spend my time proactively doing things that are positive, that will affect the things that I care about, versus cursing the darkness, which is what I was doing before, right? I just was cursing the darkness and it was helping no one.
It's easier to default to that than to put the work into all of those things you just mentioned. Like, all that takes real effort, but the payoff, I'm assuming, as I'm somebody that does not do that very well, is probably pretty life-giving. I mean, you're sitting here saying that it's life-giving. It's the practical.
Very life-giving. And I was thinking about it earlier today. I was like, I have a book coming out in a couple of weeks. I still have my job. I'm very busy. I'm still doing all my things, and it's stressful promoting a book because you're so busy and all those things. And I just thought, I'm just very happy. And despite the fact that the world's on fire and all these other things, and that was another really radical thing for me as I was going through this process. I was doing a lot of therapy. The idea that I could care about issues and not be miserable.
Yeah, I highlighted a quote from you that you've said something that I've been screaming about too. This is paraphrasing, but we are not equipped to take on the weight of the entire world's problems at every moment of every day, of which many of us are trying to have a response to every single thing that happens. And it's just like, that will make you lose your freaking mind.
Well, think about it. We are not physically designed to handle that. So before the internet and before 24/7 news and all these things, you basically were bearing what happened in your community. And then you would hear some things that were going on in the world, but you weren't being inundated with them, right? And now we are just inundated with negative information all the time, and our systems just can't handle it. And so I really am careful about what I bring into my system. I take in information to inform myself. Yeah. And I really steer away from information that's meant to activate me, which is a lot of what's going around on social media and even in the news. And so I actively do not click on that link. When I see that link and it's like, ooh, it's so juicy and it's going to be subject, and I just like, don't do it. Just don't do it. Yeah. And so I think but when my therapist said to me, you're an empathetic person, you can care about things, but you don't have to be so miserable. And I said, well, how will I know that I care? How could I care and not feel terrible all the time? How can I be happy when other people are suffering?
Right.
And she's just like, because how are you going to help other people if you're sick with chronic fatigue and, have anxiety and all these other things? And it's true. I have a much greater capacity to be present for people and to help people.
I love that.
Because I'm not taking on everything, because I'm recognizing what my load is, and I'm not Jesus. I am not God. I can't solve all the problems. Like, I'm lucky if I can solve one problem.
Right.
So,
and that's enough.
You just have to do what you can do, and you have to, and recognize that everybody's just doing the best that they can.
Yeah.
And, and that's another, guidepost I use for grace. It's like, people are doing the best that they can. And often I know we'll think, really, that doesn't seem very good. But,
right.
And it's like, well, but do you think they got up this morning and was like, I'm just going to do my worst today?
Right.
In every situation. And also, everyone needs to look back at their own lives. Every time they're accusing other people of things, it's like, really, you've never done something bad. You've always just been doing your best. Just like doing everything perfectly. It's like, we all have screwed up. We all have hurt people.
But then there's also this like nuance where it's like, but also once you see a pattern, sometimes it's worth acknowledging a pattern, specifically in like bad actors. Like,
totally,
people have gotten away with plenty of stuff for long periods of time because people are like, well, who am I to say X, Y, or Z? There's just kind of there's this weird middle ground where you have to really, I guess, navigate it for yourself with like wise counsel and all that to discern.
Yeah, but I think that's a big misunderstanding of grace, is that there's nothing about it that says you're supposed to use it to excuse bad behavior.
Right.
I go back to the Christian understanding of God. Like, does God use grace to excuse bad behavior? Not that I'm aware of. That's not. So it's not meant to enable people. Right. So we can name things. And I talk about the difference between judging people. And people will say, well, you have to make judgments. And it's like, yes, you have to make judgments. You can look at politician X and say that politician is harming people. That is a judgment. Judgmental is that politician is harming people and they are rotten to the core and they're evil and
disposable,
loathsome, and there's not a single redeemable thing about them. Right. And so it's just, we need to be discerning and clear and not activated. You're judging somebody when you get activated.
Yeah.
You can feel it versus like just recognizing it, just looking at it and going, that's a problem. And we need to do something about that. So it's already happening to me because I have a book coming out about grace. Anytime I say anything that's critical, people are like, we need to have grace. It's like, that's not what grace is. Like, grace isn't, I'm allowed to criticize people.
Right.
Like I'm allowed to say that this is a problem.
While also assigning them worth or acknowledging their worth.
And so it's been abused, honestly, and it's been something that's been used against marginalized people to say, show grace for the people who are harming you. It's like, no, that's not what grace is for. Like, that's not how it works. It's not to say we just look the other way and we don't have an opinion and, who am I kind of thing. You need to be standing up for people who are being harmed and being clear about that.
Yeah, this is so good. Well, Kirsten, I could talk to you all day, my friend, because this is stuff that I struggle with and also have been really trying to work through the past year or two. It's like, this is very applicable to me. But I told you I would only take 45 minutes, and so we're at 47 minutes.
That's okay. So I can have a couple more minutes.
The name of the book is Saving Grace, Speak Your Truth, Stay Centered, and Learn to Coexist with People Who Drive You Nuts. Okay, so I guess before I let you go, one thing, that word coexist, you kind of note about how maybe that word has been misinterpreted as well, or means different things to different people. I guess on the way out, can you maybe mention what that bit of the subtitle means to you, like learning to coexist? Because I imagine that evokes different things in different people, I think.
Well, I think I did have some Christian friends say, well, you shouldn't say coexist, you should say love or something like that. And it's like, look, I'm trying to be realistic here.
Yeah.
And so let's just try for coexist, and let's just try not wanting to kill each other. Right.
As step one.
Living in peace with each other and accepting that people are different than us. And by being different, and even sometimes holding views that we think, and I think probably correctly think are not okay, that we can still try to engage with each other with grace. So this is not about trying to be perfect. This is not even when people are coming at me and saying like, well, if you did this or that, it's like, look, I'm going to say it right now. Like, I'm going to do something that doesn't have grace. That's just going to happen because I'm a human being. So this is my touchstone. I will go back to it. And I will, if I do that, I will apologize, right?
Yeah.
That I should, if I go out and I demonize somebody, I shouldn't be doing that. So it's more like a lodestar. What should we be looking to? And like, this is the goal, and doing the best we can. And I say in the book, for some people, going from, like raw hatred of the other side to neutrality would be a huge change.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So it's not that you have to go from that to being a saint and like, I love everybody, and maybe you will, and that will be amazing. Yeah. And I'm not saying that shouldn't be something that people should aspire to do, but I'm just trying to give giving people a realistic goal, right, that doesn't just take these spiritual ideas and kind of pretend that we can just wave a magic wand and we're all going to love each other. Because I think that you brought up the unity thing earlier. I think this idea of unity is problematic because we're not unified. We don't see the world the same way, and we shouldn't pretend that we see the world the same way. We see the world very differently. I'd say, people on the right and the left want very different things for this country. And we don't need to paper that over and pretend that doesn't exist. We're not unified. But what we can do is have grace for each other.
Yeah.
And so, but when you ask people to come together and unify when they don't have the same values, I think it's offensive to people, actually, right? Mm-hmm. They actually feel offended. They feel like you don't see what's going on here. You're not appreciating what's going on here. And so I'd love to say that we're at least unified in wanting America to look a certain way, but that's not true.
Right. At all.
So, yeah. And so I think that that's why I prefer grace over unity, because I'm not going to ask somebody to unify with somebody who is literally working against, everything that they care about and everything that they believe in. But I could say, if you try to have grace, it's going to be better for you. It's going to be better for our culture. And so it's not even about that other person, right? It's just about how do we try to like turn the volume down a little bit, depolarize a little bit.
Yeah.
And start seeing the humanity in each other.
Yeah. I appreciate how realistic that is, and that leans more on the authentic spectrum than it does pie in the sky, lovey-dovey BS. I think people that are honest with themselves have no time for that, where like they need realistic ways to view the world and try to, improve themselves or help others improve, that kind of thing. So I appreciate anybody that's willing to authentically say, look, I don't have all this figured out, but here is a problem. I have lived through this, and here's what I've learned. And have you ever thought of this for yourself? I think the book achieves that, and I think it'll be a great success. I really hope it is, because I think, I've really enjoyed reading it, and I would have told you if I did not enjoy reading it, or I wouldn't have read it. I really genuinely, I read it very quickly and was really into it the entire time. So thank you for writing.
That's what a lot of people have been telling me. Like, and people who don't normally do that are like, I just like read it straight through, you know, and it's like, and so that means a lot to me. I mean, I really poured my heart and soul into this book. It was a hard book to write.
Yeah. You don't pull any punches, and you don't exactly like you talk about the good and the bad. Like you're not sugarcoating your life or your career or anything. You get pretty into the down and dirty, which I really, really appreciate. Because you could have.
This has been such a fun conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you doing this. I know it's maybe not the typical pod that you do, but I really appreciate you spending the time and writing the book and talking through it. And I guess on the way out, if people want to find you on social media, the once a month that you're on it, how do they do that? I'm
on all the things at Kirsten Powers.
At Kirsten Powers. And it's Kirsten, not Kirsten or Kristen or Kirsten or however other people are saying it. All right, Kirsten, thank you for your time, and I hope this book crushes it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for checking out this episode of the Preachers and Sneakers podcast on YouTube. If you want to stick around, maybe click one of these videos and check out other episodes. Make sure you subscribe, hit that like button on the way out. Peace.